Good afternoon. Welcome to the Accessing the Georgia Milestones, Resources and Strategies for Extended Responses. This is the middle school session number 2. It is a little different than the previous month where we had individual grade levels that we spotlighted with each assessment item, but we are going to be reviewing 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade assessment items today. My name is Sawanda Coffey. I am the math mentor here at West Georgia Research. I'd like to thank you for joining us on this wonderful Thursday. And just before we get started with the webinar, I just want to give a little bit of background information just in case you did not join us last month. The last month webinars are accessible through the West Georgia Research website. They will be located under the Services tab, and I'll talk more about that in just a second. The purpose for the webinars, again, is just to provide some prototype questions that may be structured in the same manner as what students will see in the upcoming spring administration of the Georgia Milestones. I always like to start, of course, with our norms. If you notice, you are muted during the presentation, and that is just to reduce any background noise that we may experience as we're going through the webinar. Also, you may type in questions during the presentation. If I'm not able to answer any of your questions, I will, consolidate the questions and provide answers via email. The webinars are only 30 minutes long, so we do spend that amount of time going through the assessment items and looking at student work. Also, once again, at the end of each presentation, there will be a link to the recording uploaded to the West Georgia Research site. If you travel to the Research site, there is a Services tab at the top left-hand corner. Click on that tab and scroll down to where it says Recorded Webinars, and you'll be able to access last month's webinars as well as this one. Okay, as stated before, I am covering 6th, 7th, and 8th grade in this one session, as opposed to last month, each grade level had its own webinar. So we're going to get started with the general format of my webinar. Of course, I provide the standard and the lesson essential question that's related to the assessment item that we will be reviewing. I also provide the standards for mathematical practice that are aligned to the assessment item. So this standard for 6th grade is EE9. That standard says use variables to represent two quantities in a real-world problem that change in relationship to one another. Write an equation to express one quantity thought of as the dependent variable in terms of the other quantity thought of as the independent variable. Analyze the relationship between the dependent and independent variables using graphs and tables and relate these to the equation. Once again, it's very wordy, but the lesson essential question kind of brings us into focus of what the assessment item for this grade level will be aligned to. And the lesson essential question states, how do you analyze the relationship between the dependent and independent variables using tables and relate these to the equation? The standards for mathematical practice, if you are not currently integrating these into your lessons, I encourage you to do so. In the previous webinars, I have provided the teacher behaviors and the student behaviors, as well as some questions that we may ask our students to help us to integrate this standard or these standards into our lessons. Well, standard number 1, which says make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. This is one of those standards for mathematical practice that we must incorporate into each and every one of our lessons that we provide to our students. Because we want them, to make sense of the problem and to persevere to overcome and be able to solve them. Standard number 2 says reason abstractly and quantitatively. Standard 4 is model with mathematics. And then standard 6 says attend to precision. And Standard 1 and Standard 6, again, we want to demonstrate as teachers these standards in our lessons each and every time that we present new content to our students. The 6th grade extended response assessment item for today. Once again, it is an extended response because it is going to be scored off of a 4-point rubric, and we will see what that looks like. In another one of our sessions, I did not provide that to you at this point because a good strategy to actually get comfortable with creating rubrics is you may want to build a rubric with your students. If you build a rubric with your students, then they know exactly what is expected of them at the time that they are actually trying to answer these questions. So this assessment item says a table can be used to show relationships between the number of hours a painter works painting and the total amount the painter charges for painting. It says in your student answer booklet, copy the table below about the painter's charges. First, I want to also point out that I am highlighting a recommended resource from the state, and this one I am highlighting Massachusetts. They have an assessment site where you can go and you can pull items. Either they're all different types, whether they're multiple choice, they're a short answer or extended response, and I'll provide that website to you at the end of this webinar. Okay, you have a chart that is available, and it says the painter charges $25 per hour to paint a room. So part A says complete the table you copied in your student answer booklet to show the relationship between H, the number of hours the painter works, and C, the total amount in dollars the painter charges for painting. Part B, it says write an equation that can be used to find C, the total charge for 8 hours of painting. And then it says it took the painter 13 hours to paint a room. And then part C wants you to find out what is the total amount in dollars the painter charged for painting the room. Show or explain how you got your answer. So once again, with these extended response types of questions, we want to build our students up, and so they are able to actually come up with a process of how they will go about solving this problem. And also we want to take them from, that thought process to having them to write the thought process out into complete sentences, and then we want them to be able to answer the question in the end. Some strategies to address the problem. Once again, I'm providing the problem-solving framework that I have adapted from Robert Poplinski. It is not the only problem-solving framework that is available. Some people are using different methods that they have found to be effective in their classes, but that is just as fine. I chose this one because it can be used in different aspects of our classes, which means it can be used in small groups, it can be used in whole groups, it can be used individually, it can be used on skill work, and also performance tasks. So the first question in the problem-solving framework is, what two quantities do you have to show a relationship between? And this is the questions that you will be asking the students. What are you trying to show or explain? And that is just basically, of course, what is the question asking you to do? What guesses do you have? If we incorporate this, and I would encourage each and every one of you all to add this question to, all of your questioning techniques while you're planning your lessons, because this one is meant for every student in the room to be able to just take a guess at what the answer may be. Everyone in your room can take a guess. It's not necessary, it's not excluding anybody, and nobody is at the point of being right or wrong at this point. So we definitely want to encourage and create more dialogue in our classroom, and we just ask kids to just, take a guess. And as a teacher, you can go and actually write these answers down if you want to, if you were doing it whole group or small group. or you can just have the students to write it off to the side at this time. And they can always go back and check after they've actually done the work. Next it says, what do you already know from the problem? These are specific things that have been provided in the problem to the student. What do you need to know to solve the problem? This is one of those questions that if your students can respond and tell you specifically what they need to solve the problem, whether that is graph paper, whether it is a calculator, just anything that they could tell you they need because they think it will help them solve the problem, you know that they may be on the right track to understanding what the question is asking. Next, provide all of your work while working on a problem. This is, of course, for the students. Provide a section where the students are able to just have their work, provided where they can work out everything in a section that's bigger than at least half of a sheet of paper, to give them the opportunity to write down ideas, to write down strategies that they think they need to use. And lastly, what is your conclusion? How did you reach that conclusion? Now, this last bullet is meant for us to encourage our students to write in complete sentences their conclusion. How did they come up with that? Where did they get that? What did they use? But this is all written in sentence form. Okay, student, we're looking at student scored work. Once again, this is one of those added features to the webinars. I try to highlight scored student work. So as teachers, we can look at what is considered to be an exemplary model. And then, of course, what are some students answering that may not understand at all what the question is asking. So this assessment items was scored on a 4-point rubric. Once again, I did not provide the rubric for you because these are very specific to the assessment item. So that's why I stated, this could be used to build it with your students, or if you want to get started on your own, you can build it as a teacher. So on part A, again, was complete the table you copied in your student answer booklet to show the relationship between H, the number of hours the painter works, and C, the total amount in dollars the painter charges for painting. So what the student says is, of course, on A, on the grid below, they show the number of hours and the total charge. So for 1 hour, they show that it was $25. For 2 hours, that was $50. For 3 hours, $75, and so forth. Next, on B, it says, write an equation that can be used to find C, and C is the total charge for 8 hours of painting. So the student did H times 25 equals C. So C is the total charge, and H is the number of hours. And then part C, it says, what is the total amount in dollars the painter charged for painting the room? It says, well, the painter painted for 13 hours. It took 13 hours to paint the room. Show or explain how you got your answer. So the student came up with $325 because it took him 13 hours and he charges $25 an hour. So I did 13 times 25 and got 325. So that is one way that this student scored that 4 points. This is another student that scored 4 points out of 4 for this extended response. They created the same type of table as the previous student and came out with the same set of answers. 1 hour, $25, 2 hours, $50, 3 hours, $75, and so forth. On part B, with writing an equation, the student wrote an equation that could be used to find the total amount of money the painter will be paid is H times 25 equals C. And they gave an example. So H equals 5, and 5 times 25 equals C, which is 125 for the total cost. So the equation, and they went one step further, is just to provide an example of their understanding. And part C for this same student, which they had to find the total amount in dollars the painter charged for painting a room that took 13 hours. It says the total amount in dollars the painter can charge for painting a room for 13 hours is $325. So what the student did is they pretty much broke the times up. They started off with 5 hours, and they found out from their previous example from Part B that 5 hours was $125. So another 5 hours would be another $125, and then they still had 3 more hours to go to make 13 hours, and they added the 75 to it to come up with 325. So as you notice, there are different ways that the students are approaching solving the problem. And again, that comes back to the standards for mathematical practice, incorporating those into your lesson and ensuring that the students are able to, be allowed to express their different ways of coming up with an answer. Right, a student that scored 3 points, they created the same type of chart with the number of hours and the total charge for painting. 1 hour is $25, 2 hours is $50, 3 hours $75, and so forth. And so on Part B, the equation the student did H divided by C equals 25, which they did hours divided by cost is equal to 25. So they misunderstood something, which means they divided instead of multiplied. So they should have taken the amount of hours, of course, times the amount that's charged per hour to find the final cost. In Part C, the answer is 325. I got it by multiplying 25 times 13 and so they understood some part of it. It's just they misunderstood the writing of the equation on Part B. All right, a student that scored 2 points out of 4 points, they set up their table the same as the previous student. 1 hour, $25, 2 hours, $50, 3 hours, $75, and so forth. On Part B, they have the $25 that is charged times H, which is the number of hours, equals the cost. And I know this because it is $25 per hour. Okay? And Part C is the student explaining the painter charged $125 for the room. My work is shown on the graph. Which they misunderstood that the painter took 13 hours and not 5 hours in order to complete the room. And they, instead of charging $125, they should have calculated $345. All right, the scoring for 1 point with the student. They set up the chart, but let's look at the chart. On Part A, they have 1 hour is $25. For 2 hours, they have $30. And then 3 hours, they have $35. So instead of increasing by the amount per hour, they were adding $5 more per hour. On Part B, where they have C times 13 equals P, not sure if they wanted to represent C as the actual cost times 13, but they multiplied 13 instead of 25. It should have maybe been, of course, the number of hours times 25 to find the final cost. And then lastly, the total amount in dollars the painter charged for painting the room was $325. So at some point in time, they understood about the 13 hours and being charged $25 an hour, but did not pick that up on sections A and also on section B. And as you're looking at these assessment items, just think once again to the standards for mathematical practice. Think about what strategies you could implement into your class to help out the students that are missing some of the instruction or missing some of the understanding of the assessment item. And of course, if a student scores a 0, we pretty much relate that to the student did not understand any part or the meaning of what was being asked of them. So they may have just tried, writing down some things, just providing some work or whatever their thought process was at the time. So this student, of course, 1 and 1, 2 and 2, 3 and 3, it has no explanation of where the answers came from. The same as Part B, And they provide an explanation on C that says the total charge is $38. I got my answer by adding up 13 and 25. So they gave an explanation, but it has no relevance to what was asked. Okay, next is our 7th grade standard and lesson essential question. The 7th grade standard is EE4. It says use variables to represent quantities in a real world or mathematical problem and construct simple equations and inequalities to solve problems by reasoning about the quantities. The lesson essential question for this assessment item is, how do we use variables to represent quantities in a mathematical problem and construct simple equations to solve the problem about the quantity? Okay, some standards for mathematical practice that are related to this assessment item is, of course, standard number 1, make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. Standard 4, model with mathematics. Standard 6, attend to precision. As I stated before, we always want to ensure that we are demonstrating as teachers standard number 1 and standard number 6 at all times. Standard number 7, look for and make use of structure. And then standard 8, look for and express regularity in repeated reasoning. So once again, as we go through the assessment item, just think about how are these standards being addressed in the assessment item, and also what questions would you ask the students to help them with their understanding. Okay, it says the first 5 terms in a number pattern are shown below: 7, 10, 13, 16, 19. The pattern continues using the same rule. Part A says, what is the next term in the pattern? Show or explain how you got your answer. Part B, what is the 20th term in the pattern? Show or explain how you got your answer. Write an expression that can be used to find the value of the nth term in the pattern. So once again, we want to build our students up where they are able to show and explain. On the Georgia Milestones, the expectations on the constructed and the extended response items is that the students are able to come up with a process of how they want to go about solving that, and being able to articulate that thought process into writing sentences, and that is what they'll be actually evaluated on, is the process they took to actually answer, in addition to the actual correct answer as well. All right, once again, some strategies adapted from the Robert Kaplinski. What are you trying to explain or prove? Making sure that the students know what the question is being asked. What do you already know from the problem? These are specific things that are provided to us in the problem that's given. What do you need to know to solve the problem? Once again, this is that question that will give us a great idea of where our students, where their thinking is and where they are going to solve the problem. Where are they headed? How are they going to get there? And what do they need to get to help them get there? Provide all of your work while working on problems. Once again, provide a section on paper or somewhere where the students can just work. Provide everything that they're thinking about in a work area. And lastly, what is your conclusion? How did you reach that conclusion? This is, again, we want the students to be able to articulate their thought process into writing, and we want them to actually write their thoughts and how did they come up with solving that problem in complete sentences. All right, scored student number 1, their work, once again, is 4 out of 4 points. So part A again, what is the next term in the pattern? Show or explain how you got your answer. This student explained the next number in the pattern is 22. I got my answer by following the pattern, adding 3 to the number to get the next number in the pattern. Okay. Part B says, what is the 20th term in the pattern? The student responded, the 20th number in the pattern is 64. And I will provide a copy of the grid where they provided that information for you on part C, at the bottom of part C. Part C says, write an expression that can be used to find the value of the nth term of the pattern. So the student provided an explanation, one expression that can be used to determine the value of the nth term in the pattern is 3n plus 4 equals maybe b. It says n equals the term in the pattern, and it says see the example in the grid below. So you see that the student created this long chart where they started off with the first number and continued throughout the sequence, and they know that you were adding 3 to each of the previous terms to get to the next term. And so what they have 10th term in the pattern, they have is 34. So 3n plus 4. So in their case, the 10th term is 3 times 10 and then add 4, which is 34. Okay, this is another student that scored 4 points out of 4 on this assessment item. On part A, once again, what is the next term in the pattern? The student explained the next term in the pattern is 22. I know this because the number you add 5 to get the next term is 3. This is because 7, 10, 13, you add 3 to 7 to equal 10, and so on. If the last number is 19, then the next number plus 3 is 22. All right, part B is what is the 20th term in the pattern? The student explained the 20th term in the pattern is 64. To find this out, you can do it 2 ways. Very good strategy. The student has 2 different ways that they're going to explain of how they came up with their answer. One way is to count from the 6th term, 22, and keep on adding 3s until you get to the 20th term. To simplify, take the 5th term and 15 times 3 to get the 20th term. You get 64. Another way is to use the rule that will be explained next. So this student went on to provide at least 2 ways that they thought about solving. And then part C is write an expression that can be used to find the value. So on part C, the student says the expression to find any term is 7 plus 3 times n minus 1. This is because 7 is the first term, and the term you want, it's negative 1 times 3 is the number you want to add to 7. This is because the rule goes up by 3. So you have 7 plus 3 times 20 minus 1. Then you have 7 plus 3 times 19, and then 7 plus 67 equals 64. It works, and this is how I got my answer. So we're seeing different ways that students are coming up with how they're answering these questions. For the student that scored 3, the answer is 22. When you add 3, you get to the next term, and they just provide a little work for you. On part B, the same thing. The answer is 64, and their explanation is when you continue the pattern as labeling it until you get to 20 terms. Now, they did the extended version is, of course, and this is okay. If this is the way that students understand, and it's okay to actually write out every term until you get to the one that you are looking for. And then on part C, the student says n is equal to 3n plus 7. And this is where the actual mistake came into play because the student incorrectly applied the distributive property in a sub n is equal to 7 plus 3n minus 1. It should have the next with student that scored 2 points. It says the next term in the pattern is 22. That's what part they answer to part A. Part B is the 20th term in the pattern is 64. Okay, and then C is the expression that can be used to find the value 60. The nth term in the pattern is 22n minus 64. So on part C is where they made it incorrect with the incorrect expression being used to find the nth term. And student number 5 scored 1 point out of 4. With part A, the next term in the pattern would be 22 because if you add 3 to every one before, you would get the next number. And they provide some examples for you. We've seen that in the previous answers as well. The 20th term in the pattern would be 60, because if you want to find the 20th term, you have to multiply by 3. And if you multiply by 3, you get 60. I think the student misunderstood how to actually use the pattern that was being done. So not quite sure how. Well, they explained by, multiplying 20 times 3, but they were kind of off a little bit. Then on part C, an expression you could use to find nth term is n plus 3 or 3 plus n. For example, if you put 7 in the n spot, 7 plus 3 is 10, so that will work in the pattern. And we see here with part C for student work number 5, it works for the first number, but the student did not go further and see if it worked for all of the other numbers. And lastly, with a score of 0, once again, we say that with a score of 0, the student did not provide enough information to give the evaluator an idea that they understood what was being asked. So if we look at some of the work that was provided, it says 7, 10, 13, 16, 19, and then 23. The next number is 23. How? Because I figured out the pattern. First skip one number, then 2, next skip 3. So they did not understand about the actual pattern that was going on in the problem. B is 26 because the pattern is still in the 20s, not quite understanding that thought process, and then of course the answer for part C. Once again, as we're looking through these, we have to think about, as teachers, what is it that we could implement in our class that will help this particular student to understand what the question is being asked. And you plan for these things. It's very ideal to have your questions prepared before this happens, those misconceptions. So always think about that in your planning process. Okay, lastly is the 8th grade standard lesson in EQ. It is G7, apply the Pythagorean theorem to determine unknown side lengths in right triangles in real world and mathematical problems in 2 and 3 dimensions. The lesson essential question is, how do we apply the Pythagorean theorem to determine unknown side lengths and use the length to find the area of a 2-dimensional object? Some standards for mathematical practice related to this assessment item for grade 8 is, number 1, make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. Standard 2, reason abstractly and quantitatively. Standard 4, model with mathematics. And standard 6, attend to precision. For the 8th grade extended response assessment item is, Danielle measured 2 of the computer screens in her school's computer lab. The 2 screens and some of their dimensions are shown below. So if you're looking, just review. Part A says, what is the area in square inches of screen 1? Show or explain how you got your answer. Part B, what is X, the diagonal length in inches of screen 1? Show or explain how you got your answer. And which computer screen 1 or screen 2, has the greater area? Show your work or explain how you got your answer. Once again, the same problem-solving framework. What are you trying to show or explain? What units will the answer be expressed in? And I've added some, and like I said, this is adaptive, so I've added some questions that I thought would be important for the students to know. What do you already know from the problem? What do you need to know to solve the problem? Provide all of your work while working on the problem. And what is your conclusion? Once again, being able to have those students to write that answer in complete sentences. All right, let's look at a score of 4 for this assessment item. Once again, what is the area in square inches of screen 1? This student has 12 times 9, which is 108. The area of screen 1 is 108 inches. On B, what is X, which is the diagonal length of screen 1. So the student did provide the diagram and with the label. And so what they did is they used the Pythagorean theorem. The leg, 9 squared plus 12 squared equals c squared, and they calculated the screen 1 is 15. So x equal to 15 inches. And part C, which screen 1 or screen 2 has the greater area? They already calculated the area for screen 1 doing 12 times 9. Now, in order on screen 2, what was missing was the actual one of the leg measurements. So what the student did was they actually substituted one of the leg measurements into the Pythagorean theorem formula, and they simplified and came out with approximately 13.03 as the length of one of the legs. And they used the two measurements, the one that just found for one of the legs and the other leg, and found that the area is 106.84. So therefore, screen 1 has the greater area. This is another where the student wrote out a lot of information. So therefore, part A, the area of the rectangle equals length times width. I know the width of screen 1 is 9 inches and the length is 12. I can simply plug into A equals LW. A equals 12 inches times 9, and that's 108 inches squared. So make sure we actually indicate that. Just look at that. Part B, the diagonal length of screen 1 divides it into two triangles. That means that the diagonal length is the hypotenuse. To find that, I can use the Pythagorean theorem for a right triangle. The rectangle has 90 degrees, so its dividing line created right triangle, which states that a squared plus b squared equals c squared. We can see that this student had a great understanding of what was being asked. I can fill in what I know into the equation and solve, and that is what they did, and they came out with 15 inches as C. That's the diagonal. And then their part C is they pretty much did the same thing. They did their substitution, but they used c squared minus b squared equals a squared, because they knew the hypotenuse, and they knew one of the legs. So they squared the hypotenuse minus the square of one of the legs and found the remaining, and then they took the square root of that, which is about 13.03 as the previous student did. And they also determined that they found the area for screen 2 to be 106.88976 inches squared. And once again, they also determined that the area of screen 1 was greater than that of screen 2. 3 points. The area of the screen is 108 for this one, same as what we've seen previous. And B as well, they came up with 15 as the length of the diagonal. And their part C, they're saying both screens 1 and 2 have the same area. I got my answer by finding the area of screen 1. So at some point, they missed finding the correct area for both of those screens, for screen 1 and screen 2, because they're saying that screen 1 and screen 2 have the same area. They multiplied base times height to get the answer 108. Then to find the area of screen 2, I used Pythagorean theorem to find the B in the equation. Once I found the B, I multiplied the base times the height of the screen 2 to get 108. But made some calculation mistakes somewhere in that. Student scored work number 4. This is 2 points out of 4. They said the area is 108. And it should be expressed in square inches. So please, that's where number 6 comes in the standards for mathematical practice, making sure that we attend to precision. B is the x diagonal length of the screen is 15 inches, and they're saying that the areas are the same as well. The student did not show or explain how answer was obtained, and answer to C is incorrect. So that was my added note to probably why the student only scored 2 points out of 4. There was really no explanation of how they came up with the answers. And we have to take that into consideration when we're, using these sample questions in our classes. We If it says to explain, then we want to make sure that they are able to explain. A score of 1, same thing. They came out with 12 times 9 to find the area of screen 1, which is 108 square inches. B, 108 divided by 2 is equal to 54. And they're saying that that is the length, the area, I'm assuming, of screen 2. And then they don't really provide too much details for you on part B. It's just some calculations that they conducted with no explanation. So I don't have an explanation of their thoughts. Then lastly, of course, is the student with a score of 0. They says the area is 9. They get 12 minus 9. And then 3 times 3 equals 9. Not quite sure their thoughts, why they would place that there. But it clearly demonstrates that they did not have an understanding of what was being asked. And lastly, with the feedback, of course, I am a very dear advocate for providing students with feedback, whether it's written or verbal, but I think it must be given, and it must be given frequently, at least every other week to your students, so they will know if they're on the right track or they're actually working towards the next steps that you're providing to them in order to master the standard. As I just stated, feedback must be provided to tell the student their next steps, and of course, use the language of the standards when providing that feedback to your students. Always reference that standard throughout your lesson, but also when you provide that feedback, provide it using direct language that you've got from the standard. I thank you again for joining me for this webinar. The assessment items that have highlighted for this month were from Massachusetts Comprehensive Assessment System. The website is provided here to you. Spend the next month, getting to know this resource in addition to what I presented last month. You will have more than enough assessment items or sample items that you could pull to use in your classes. And of course, the Georgia Frameworks is always a good place to go back and actually pull some of those tasks, chunk them, break them up into smaller pieces, and use them as constructed or extended response items in your class. I thank you for your time. We don't have any questions, so have a terrific Tuesday.